Everyone, it's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. Emil Amok to you. Welcome to my takeout, my Emil Amok's takeout. It's we're hoping to ease into the next week, the week after Easter. But now, hey, we've got this is tragic, right? I mean, you don't expect this after Holy Week. You get, the death on Friday, you get the resurrection on Sunday. You don't expect another real death on Monday. It's the gut punch from Pope Francis. He's gone. You wake up, at 6 a.m. I'm thinking, oh, did I do the right thing by going to virtual mass this time? Shouldn't I have been there in church with the community? Well, maybe, but I did attend virtually like it was COVID, right? Remember those pictures of him during COVID, Francis, before a flock that was empty. It was an empty flock or an empty church holding up doing the mass. That's what I'll remember him for. Being inclusive of all the people who weren't there. That's what people are talking about. They're talking about the inclusive Pope. He was the inclusive Pope. When I woke up, I couldn't believe it this morning. It had to be some kind of joke, right? It had to be. So we're in mourning the passing of the man I call diversity's Pope because he was for inclusion. He was for diversity. Francis Jorge Maria Bergoglio, the son of Italian immigrants to Argentina, the first Pope from Latin America in nearly 1,300 years of popedom, right? I mean, it's incredible. The first that happened when you do it as the Pope. And already I'm starting to see people talk about, well, if the diversity will extend post-Francis to Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle of the Philippines, for example. An Asian Pope they're talking about. And there could be an Asian Pope, there are a number of Asian cardinals who are in the picture, but a Filipino Pope, Cardinal Tagle was seen as the Asian Francis. So maybe this is something that the Filipinos will get oh, wow, here it is. Filipino Pope, Asian Pope. Or maybe an African Pope. We've never had an African Pope. That would be something. Or will we go back to Benedict's time and get a, European Northern Hemisphere Pope? Go back to tradition after 12 years of Francis. That's the politics, and we're gonna have the politics as we wait for the white smoke, but that's gonna be for another day. On Easter Monday, we are still recovering from that gut punch of Francis's passing. And I say this as a bad Catholic. I admit to being a bad Catholic. And I say that because I see Francis as a forgiving Pope. I'd like to think he'd forgive me, the bad Catholic. A bad, but a principled bad Catholic. Because I know why I don't like the church. I don't like the church because I don't like the way it's run. I mean, at least here in America, right? In the last 20 years, get this, in January of this year, they released a report from the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate at Georgetown. Paid more than $5 billion spent on allegations of sexual abuse. I think that number is higher. I think it was more like in the 20s. I checked that figure. But spent on allegations of sexual abuse by minors, and these are just cases in the U.S. I was never violated by a priest, but any violation, and there are more than 16,000 cases deemed credible by this report in the U.S. alone, is a violation toward all the 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide. And I know Francis tried to make changes. I mean, he shut down a Peruvian-based group because of a culture of sexual and psychological abuse of its members. In the U.S., he defrocked and then laicized the convicted Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. So, yeah, he was kind of proactive in a way, but no matter what he did, any reforms to undo the sins of the Catholic pedophiles and abusers were never enough. Certainly not enough to stop the continual abuse completely. One wonders, would the Protestant way, allowing priests to marry, be a solution? Possibly, but not for Catholicism. Although I saw Bishop Buddy of the Episcopal Church, she was up there talking on the cable news shows about how Francis was a leader to all of us, to all spiritual people. He was a leader. So everyone mourns. But how do we assess what he did? Did he do enough? On some other fronts, Francis did seek greater acceptance for LGBTQ Catholics. He authorized blessings for same-sex couples. He allowed transgender people to be baptized and become godparents. But once again, did it go enough? Now, Francis urged that women have a greater role in the church, but stopped well short of the priesthood, which is too bad. I mean, you can have parishes with female administrators. In churches that's been the case for, where I've attended. That was the best church community that I've been a part of. And I know at least one woman who has left the church and is now a practicing Episcopal minister, a holy mother. I suppose that in a strict church culture bound by tradition, little moves are much bigger than they appear. But as I said, it never seemed to be significant enough, at least to solve the problems of today's church, and never enough to convince me that the church had a monopoly of spirituality. And I began to be solemn and look for spirituality from other sources, other semi-religious, meditative sources. And yet, as I fail to reconcile the ways of the church and my own search for faith, I know that the Holy Father, if I were fortunate to be in his presence, would have seen and heard me, because that's who he was, right? That's who the Pope was. He was a man who reached out to the people on the margins, who saw themselves on the fringe of the establishment. And I know maybe he would have allowed for my confession. And if that happened, hey, I'd happily rejoin the flock. Because you had to love Francis, right? Named for the saint, the namesake of my birthplace, San Francisco. Of course, I was not that lucky. Even when Francis came to the United States, not that lucky to cover the story and to see him. Although he met with Whoopi Goldberg, he met with, I think, all these comedians, Jim Gaffigan. I could have told him some jokes. But if I had the honor of his company, I would have asked for confession, or at least his absolution and his blessing. And if that happened, like I said, I'd happily rejoin the flock. Now take J.D. Vance, for example. The vice president, he met with the pontiff hours before his death, apparently. I doubt J.D. Vance, as the last U.S. political leader to pay the Pope a visit, asked for a confession. I mean, carrying water for Donald Trump needs more than a confession. Besides, I don't know if a single human like J.D. Vance could say enough Hail Marys. I don't know if there are enough Hail Marys to say. Vance, who is a convert to Catholicism, did receive, from reports, a tie and some Easter candies for his kids from the Pope during Holy Week. But if Vance wanted to earn his Catholic stripes and really make news, he could have repented for all the Trump administration has done. Really? Oh, come on, Emil. Those aren't sins. Well, I don't know. Not sins? Bless me, Father, for I have, let me count the ways. How about maliciously striking fear in the hearts of all immigrants and migrants, assumed by ICE to be criminals who don't belong? Francis was a big critic of the immigration policies, the hardline immigration policies in the U.S. Vance could have asked for prayers from the Pope, who has urged for peace between Ukraine and Russia. What has Vance done? He says publicly that he feels it may be time to move on and abandon Ukraine. Vance could have said, look, I'm feeling weak. Pray for me. Help me. Help me find a way to peace. Vance isn't interested. Vance could have raised the forgiveness for what the Trump administration is doing, favoring tax cuts to billionaires instead of making a difference in the lives of the poor and working class. Vance could have, but he didn't. His loyalty to one man, and it's not a pope, it's his president. So Trump was in Washington while all this was going on at that new and grifty Easter egg roll with corporate sponsors for the first time. An Easter egg event is already pretty secular, right? But to corporatize it with a New York Stock Exchange ringing of the bell, they had some kind of booth or something. I mean, it's secular and vulgar, the opposite of holy. And maybe that's why the President of the United States could only come up with 2 lines on his social media post referencing the death of Francis. Quote, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis!" Exclamation. "May God bless him and all who loved him." Okay, maybe slightly better than thoughts and prayers. Genial, but inauthentic and pretty pro forma, really. I wonder if AI didn't write that. To see Trump and Vance address the Pope is so revealing. Compared to a holy man, Trump and Vance are soiled and disgraceful. Trump is, after all, the man I call convicted felon Donald Trump 34, as in counts of fraud. And yet, for his being so soiled and disgraceful, that Trump, Francis would look at him and forgive Trump, forgive Vance, forgive them both, because that's what a pope does. And he would have voted. He would have forgiven them. He just wouldn't have voted for them. And if he could, I'm almost sure he wouldn't have voted for them. Although now that he's dead, well, maybe, dead people vote for Trump. So some thoughts about the death of the Pope. I mean, you're going to get from other sources, you're going to get people saying, oh, the Pope, so great, simple man. Yes, he was. I honor and revere him for that. Revere him for being authentically spiritual. But look, he died of heart disease and he had a heart attack and a stroke, according to reports. He looks like a man who didn't miss a meal. But I don't know if there was something he couldn't have done about his diet late in life. He was 88. He was the Pope. He went out swinging, and probably other spiritual people have said this, that if one could orchestrate a death, could there be a better time for a pope to go then? Easter Monday, the day after resurrection, the day after the most holy day, you go back to your normal life and, oh, the reality, the Pope is dead. Sad reality. Anyway, look for my column wherever my column has outlets. I've got it out there. Questioning, wondering, pondering Pope Francis. Would he have forgiven Trump and Vance? I know he, for their sins. I know he would have forgiven me, a bad Catholic. That's still, Catholicism, when it has its hooks on you, you don't really quit it that easily. So I say I'm a lapsed Catholic, but as I said, mostly because of, the billions of dollars spent on allegations of sexual abuse by minors. And this is according to a January 2025 report released by Georgetown. About 16,000 cases deemed credible. I mean, how can the church live with itself if it doesn't do enough to try to rid itself of that? And it's hurt the operations of the church. Only 16% of those billions of dollars were covered by quote unquote insurance monies, meaning, you big corporation, you have insurance to cover that. But a lot of it comes from donations, from the passing of the basket. And it just astonishes me that the church can't get it together to deal with that after all these years. This was a report over just the last 20 years. That only takes us to 2000. You go back to the abuse of the 60s and the 70s. And so I know a lot of people want to skip that over now. Yes, I know it's too soon in some ways, but it's not, because I had to explain why I was a bad Catholic, and that's the reason why. And I'm sure that's the reason why a lot of people have left. But there's something about Francis that was a positive sign that the church could move, or was moving, at least was tilting in the right direction. Who knows if it will continue to do so? But Francis, first Latin American Pope, was the start. And now he's gone. And now, as I said, already people are talking about, well, are we going to see the first Asian Pope? Maybe the Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines? First Asian. They saw him as the Asian Francis. And there's another guy out of Africa. Are we going to see the first black Pope? Wow, that would be something. I mean, the first black Pope, that would be something. African Pope, it would be something. And the majority of the cardinals who are there now are, or have been, or were appointed by Francis. So maybe we'll see people voting for a continuation of Francis. We'll see. Anyway, hopefully I've given you some things to think about. Yeah, it's sad, but think about what Francis's life meant. I mean, because of Francis, I stayed close to the church. I didn't want to just cast it aside and say, I'm done with you. I sought spirituality from meditation mostly. Not necessarily a God, looking at a God, but looking at other gods, world gods. The gods in Buddhism, the gods in Hinduism, and those practices and beliefs. I mean, that's one of the things about those meditative practices. that they may have gods in their narratives, but you can approach them as a Catholic, as a Jew, as a, it's really non-sectarian to a degree if you just practice the ideas of spirituality. You don't have to necessarily give up a base religion from which you were schooled, or from which you were baptized, or you entered into the world, your family and whatnot. But as I said, when I call myself a bad Catholic, it's because I see the things that have happened to the church, and I wonder, why can't the church get its act together? You can go back to Boston, right? I mean, the Boston Globe did a big expose, spotlight, right? Go back to that big story. Go back here in California, Archbishop Mahoney, L.A. Go back to here in California, up and down the coast, from Sacramento to L.A. That's Mahoney, and that's beyond 2000. That's why there are I know this isn't just me. There are a lot of lapsed Catholics because of that history that has never really been fully addressed. And if it has, well, it's taken billions of dollars. And if Francis was our best hope, we didn't get very far. Not as far as we could have. Anyway. But as I said in my piece, if I was able to confess to Francis, it would have been, if I had the honor of meeting him and confessing, I know he would have given me a hell of a penance, but he would have recognized me and brought me in. God bless him. All right, that's our show for today. Hey, a little loving kindness. Loving kindness, that's what we end this show with. It's all about love, right? I mean, Francis, he believed that. We weren't far. I might have been lapsed, but we're not far if we believe in love. And like I said, I think he would have, if Trump and Vance had asked for I think he'd forgive them. Of course. He'd recognize them as soiled degenerates that they are, and he'd want to embrace them and forgive them. Like I said, he'd forgive them. He just wouldn't vote for them. I know that. All right. Loving kindness. So, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Yes, as San Guillermo is my witness. Peace and love to you. Mahal Kita.